so many other things, selfishness. He just does it. And if we wish to really shine with all his glory and be laden with much fruit, then we must choose to abide in him. Now, what does that mean, abide in him? The word abide is not part of our everyday vocabulary. We don't use it too much, but it means remain, to stay, to endure. In this context, it means to hang on. What Jesus is saying is that to yield much fruit for his glory, we must hang on to him for dear life, for our dear life. And you know something, just as a branch hangs on to the vine, even when facing fierce winds and rain and torments and storms and things like that, we must hang on Jesus when the storms of life overwhelm us. The entire exercise makes us stronger in him. And I would like to make you visualize it a little bit. We have in our church members in the Spanish congregation, I don't know if we have here, who do grafting. I don't know, I am planning to take Dionisio to come to my home to do some, not only pruning, but grafting also. From one tree, I would like to receive fruits of different trees. So he knows how to do it. And what does he have to do to the vine if he wants to do some grafting? Well, has to cut it, has to hurt it, so he can insert the other branch into the vine. And my question is this: isn't it that what the cross is about? Didn't our adoption into Christ's life cause Jesus Christ pain? Yes, absolutely. But he loved us to the very end, says John chapter 13, verse 1, and wouldn't have it any other way. Here is the point. We must hang on now. Hang on as Jacob did to the angel when he was fighting with him. We must not let him go at all. For even though this is the only way to have life, our natural tendency is to run away. But don't leave. Don't walk away. Let's abide in him until we, as the branches, are so identified with the vine that it will be impossible for us ever to live again. You know, reflecting on this, beloved, reflecting on the character of Jesus Christ and bearing fruit that can tell which tree we belong to, because all of us produce fruits in life. And people know from what kind of a tree we produce fruits. That is one side of the coin. It's one side of the witnessing coin, I should say. The other is using the gift of the Spirit for the advancement of the kingdom. There are 4 major chapters in the New Testament. We just read a little bit from one, but that lists the spiritual gifts. We have there Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12. We have 1 Peter 4. We have Ephesians 4. And there are many other references to additional gifts, because there are so many found elsewhere. We have in 1 Corinthians 13, we have in Ephesians 3, in other places. But in each of the main references, the root foundation of the fruit of the Spirit always is love. Always is alluded to in connection with all the gifts. Paul, after listing prophecy, for example, that was read this morning, service, teaching, exhortation, giving, leadership, and mercy, Paul tells the Romans to let love be without hypocrisy in chapter 12, verse 6 to 9. So these, after all, are gifts of grace, that is, gifts of love. And to the Corinthians, Paul devoted a whole chapter about love, chapter 13, 1 Corinthians 13. And in the middle of his teaching about gifts, concluding that love never fails, because even though gifts may come and go, faith, hope, and love abide. And the greatest of these, says Paul, is love. So, to the Ephesians, the Ephesians were a more mature church, so the apostle wrote to them and mentioned other gifts: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, the teachers. The objective of such gifting by God is to lead them to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, according to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 13, to spiritual maturity that would eventually reflect the fullness of Christ. And as a result, they will be stable, not easily moved, as Paul said to the Galatians, and carried by every wind of doctrine, and would speak the truth in love, while growing up in all aspects into the head, which is Jesus Christ. So, last, we find Peter urges the followers of Jesus Christ to use their gifts. And he says in 1 Peter 4:10, serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. But introduces his admonition with, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. I mentioned already that the gifts of the Spirit were gifts of grace. And charismata in Greek, coming from Jesus, yet distributed by the Spirit. So, the grace of Jesus Christ secured the right to give us the gifts, according to Ephesians chapter 4. But it is the Spirit of Jesus who manages such rights on earth. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12:11, the same Spirit works all these things, distributing the gifts to each one individually, just as he wills. Very interesting. Gifts are given then according to grace and according to the Spirit. I found it very interesting that both sources, the grace and the Spirit, are inexhaustible in the economy of God. For Romans 5:20 says, when sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. The New Testament also teaches the multiple purpose of the spiritual gifts. And for the sake of the church, unity, and for spiritual maturity. And to carry on the ministry of the church to the glory of Jesus Christ and to the glory of God. And some may be surprised to see major purposes of spiritual gifts has been church unity or spiritual growth of the body, but there is a logic to it. Jesus has told his disciples, and appears in John 13, love one another even as I have loved you. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Beautiful. If we as the church want to make an impact in Lindsay or in the world, it won't be through our resources. It won't be through this temple. It would be through any institutions or even our doctrines. It will be because the love of God has taken over our lives in such a way that our family, our friends, our members of our where we work or whatever, and even strangers will see in us such Christ-like love for each other that they will conclude that it's simply not of this world. It's something supernatural. Myself, I have spent time in spiritual gifts, seminars all over through the years, focusing on particular gifts and on whether or not I have that gift. Probably you too. But the inventory approach to learning about the gifts is very limited in his ability to get the big picture. What we need is Jesus. All of him, every single day. His presence through the Spirit will fill us to the very brim, I should say, and he will spill out in a variety of manifestations and gifts. You know, I got an illustration that is a very simple one, but a little girl was in a church listening to the pastor, but she was not listening, she was drawing, and her grandmother was next to her, and suddenly the pastor evidently said something, and she pulled her grandmother and said, "Grandma, did the pastor say that God is in us?" "Yes, honey," he said that. And she kept drawing until moments later, when another question needed an urgent answer, she asked it again, "Grandma, did the pastor just say that God is bigger than us?" And she said, "Oh, of course, God is bigger than us." And then the little girl said something very curious. If he is bigger than us, and he lives in us, shouldn't some of him show through? Indeed, he should. He should. Is our experience with Jesus Christ so real, so genuine, that it is impossible for him not to show through in our lives? Beloved, that is witnessing. That is witnessing. Let me read from Testimonies to the Ministers, page 174, the following. The promise of the Holy Spirit belongs as much to us as it did to them.